Hi, welcome to Regional Park's online programming. This afternoon we are at Mission Creek Regional Park in Kelowna on the traditional territory of the Okanagan Silks people, and we are in the park today to talk about cicadas. My name is Risty and behind the camera is James, and we will do a short little video about cicadas. We often hear them in the park at this time of year, but what do we really know about cicadas? They're a fascinating bug, and as we'll learn, they're a bug that we usually hear when we're out and about on a hot day, but we rarely see them. They are a true bug, and what do I mean when I say that they are a true bug? Aren't all insects true bugs? No, they're not. When scientists use the word bug, they are referring to a very specific type of insect. So all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. So cicadas are in the order of true bugs, and there are lots of different orders of insects. There's the orders of butterflies and moths, and the orders of spiders and arachnids, and the orders of ants and mosquitoes and bees and all those sorts of things. And one of those orders is true bugs, and cicadas fall into that order. And what makes a true bug different than an insect? The main difference is in their mouthpiece. So true bugs have a proboscis that is very rigid and doesn't retract. So a proboscis of an insect like a butterfly or a bee, that proboscis would roll back up in their mouth like a tongue, but the proboscis of a true insect like a cicada is rigid like a straw and is always just out, and it can't be retracted. So that mouthpiece, the proboscis that is rigid and is always out, is the main difference between true bugs and insects. And most true bugs will eat liquids from plants. There are some true bugs that feed on animals, like bed bugs. Bed bugs are a true insect, and they like to feed on a liquid known as blood. But cicadas feed on liquids from trees. So that's what a true bug is as compared to an insect. And why do we rarely see cicadas? We don't often see them, and often when you say to somebody, well, we have cicadas in the park, they're not quite familiar with what they look like. And I think before I go any further, we'll take a look at just what I'm talking about when I say a cicada. It's a nice hot day here in the park. We're at Mission Creek Regional Park taking a closer look at cicadas, because of course this time of year we hear lots of cicadas in the park, but we don't often see them. So because it's such a nice warm day, and cicadas love the warmth, James and I were able to capture a cicada. It's an insect in the order of true bugs, and true bugs have that proboscis that is always rigid, is always out. It doesn't retract like the proboscis of other insects like bees and butterflies. So this is a cicada. You can see it has those beady eyes, 2 eyes. They're wide set. Like all insects, it has 6 legs. It has 3 body parts: the head, the thorax, an abdomen, the wings that are connected to the thorax. So this is what a cicada looks like. When you're out in the park, on a trail, on a hot summer day, and you hear that buzzing or humming up in the trees or clicking all around you, it is this little guy and his friends, the cicadas, humming and clicking away up in the trees on a hot day. And cicada comes from a Latin word that means tree cricket, which is quite fitting because they like to live up in the trees and they click and make sounds like a cricket. But they're not a cricket, it's a cicada. So why do we not really see them very often? They make a lot of noise. We're all quite familiar with their sound, even if we're not sure who exactly is making all that racket. So why don't we see them very often? The reason is, there are two main reasons. The first reason is they are fossorial. So that means they live underground, or they spend most of their life underground. The cicada has 3 parts to its life cycle. So it's an egg, and then the eggs hatch into a nymph, and then the nymphs will grow and develop into an adult, like this. So a female cicada will lay her eggs in any sort of slit or opening in a branch or twig. She can lay up to 400 eggs in all sorts of different sites. Those eggs will develop for about 6 to 10 weeks, and then a young nymph will hatch right out of the egg, and those nymphs drop down from the tree to the ground, and then the nymph digs with its front legs underground. They can dig up to 30 centimeters or up to 2.5 meters underground, depending on the species. And the nymphs will live underground, depending on the species, anywhere from 3 to 4 years up to 13 or 17 years for some species. But here in the Okanagan, like with this little guy, as in his nymph stage, once the nymph hatches out of its egg, that nymph will drop to the ground, dig a burrow under the ground near some tree roots, because remember that proboscis, he'll use that mouth part to suck liquid from tree roots, and he'll live in his underground burrow for 3 to 4 years. We don't see him when he's underground. He's down there, but we don't see him. And then after about 3 or 4 years, once he's gone through a few growth stages and he's a bit bigger, and his instincts tell him that it's time to emerge, it's time to come up, he can sense that the conditions are right for breeding, the soil temperature is getting warmer, they'll dig their way up and emerge as an adult, and then they will mate. And once they're up above ground, they only live for about 4 to 6 weeks, and they spend all of that time mating, and then they die. So we don't see them because they're underground. When they do come up, they only live for about 4 to 6 weeks. And in the Okanagan in Canada, we have cicadas that are called annual cicadas. So that just means we have cicadas that are emerging every year. We have all sorts of different broods that overlap each other. So every summer, every year, there are some nymphs that are developed enough and ready to emerge from the ground to mate. In other parts of the world, like the eastern United States, where they have periodic cicadas, that's where the cicadas, the nymphs only emerge every 13 or 17 years, depending on the species. So those nymphs will live in their underground burrows, feeding on tree roots for 13 or 17 years. Nobody is quite sure why they do that. Scientists think that maybe they've adapted to avoid predators, but not quite sure why. But here in the Okanagan, we have cicadas every year. So we don't see them. One reason is because they're fossorial, they're living underground. And another reason we don't see them is because they're arboreal, which is just a word that means they live in the trees. They live up in the trees. You can see this guy here. I mean, he would camouflage really well up against some bark, hiding up on a branch. And of course, they don't have long to live, only 4 to 6 weeks, and they spend all of that time trying to mate and mating, or trying to avoid being eaten by predators like birds. So they have 4 to 6 weeks to survive and try to mate. So they're hiding, they're hanging out, looking for a mate. We don't see them because they don't want to be seen. They don't really have any defense other than to fly away. Their only mouth part is that rigid proboscis, so they don't bite. You can hear the fluttering of his wings up against the jar, but that is not the sound that we would hear when we're out walking. He's just a little agitated because we have him in the jar. Yeah, and I'll let him go, of course, once we're done here. But we wanted to get a close-up look at this guy because we don't usually see him. We always hear him at this time of year, but we don't usually get to see him because he's either underground, developing as a nymph, or he's up hiding in the trees looking for a lady and trying not to get eaten by some waxwing or robin or some other sort of bird. And one of the, well, there's lots of interesting things about these guys, But one of the interesting things about them, and maybe you have seen this sort of evidence yourself out in the park or on the trail. I'll put him down for now. When they emerge from the ground after 3 or 4 years, you know it's time to come out and look for some love. They dig their way up from the ground. They're still in their nymphal exoskeleton. So cicadas, they're a true bug. True bugs are insects. Insects don't have an internal skeleton. They have a skeleton on the outside of their body called an exoskeleton. So the cicada will emerge from the ground and it needs to shed its exoskeleton, because inside of that casing, that exoskeleton, is the adult cicada with its wings. And James was lucky enough a few weeks ago to come across this adult cicada busting out of its exoskeleton. So this guy would have just burrowed his way up from the ground somewhere nearby that tree stump. And he's coming out of the exoskeleton.
There's its exoskeleton on the back, and this is the live bug right here.
Yeah, so that's like the
cicada.
one that we just looked at in the jar.
Yeah.
You can see he's emerging just fresh like that. He still needs to sort of firm up and harden a bit. His color is going to change a bit. The one we just looked at in the specimen container was a lot darker, a lot more brown. So here's a fresh cicada just coming out. You can see where that exoskeleton is cracked. So maybe you've seen an exoskeleton out walking in the park and wondered, what the heck is that? Because all sorts of insects in the park will shed an exoskeleton. Lots of pond insects will shed an exoskeleton, but these ones are cool because we get to see them walking around on the trail, because the cicada nymph needs to clutch on to something, like a leaf or a branch or a twig, as it sort of struggles and crawls out of that exoskeleton. So this is one that we found on a leaf. You can see, so that nymph would have burrowed up from the ground, climbed up onto this leaf, clutched on. Once he had a good grip, then the adult cicada within, he busted out. So have you seen something like this in the park? On a leaf, on a branch, you're out walking. I often see these cicada exoskeletons on the leaves of an arrowleaf balsam root flower. We have lots of them here at Mission Creek Regional Park. I've seen lots of cicada exoskeletons at Rose Valley Regional Park, at Calamore Regional Park. So you ever saw that and thought, what the heck is that? It's an exoskeleton from a cicada. It's exactly what that is. Some adult cicada busted out of that exoskeleton, and now he's out there somewhere flying around. He or she is out there somewhere flying around trying to mate. So cicadas are fossorial. They spend most of their life cycle underground. As nymphs, they come up from the ground. The cicadas will bust out of their exoskeleton and fly up into the tree somewhere, so they're arboreal. They're living up in the trees and hiding from predators and trying to mate. And that clicking, that humming, that buzzing sound that we hear at this time of year is the males trying to attract a female. So the females don't make that sound that is common to cicadas. It's the males who are making that sound. So I don't know if this is a guy or a gal. I'm not sure, but it's the males who make that buzzing sound, humming, a clicking. I hear all sorts of clicks around me right now. That is the cicadas. And the males have special structures on the sides of their abdomen called tymbals, and they can move those tymbals using their muscles. So it's sort of like beating on a drum. And then the clicks from those tymbals reverberate inside of their hollow abdomen, and that produces that sound, that characteristic sound that we hear. And the females are attracted to that sound. So some cicadas make a sound that is so high-pitched that human ears cannot hear it. Some cicadas make a sound at such a high decibel that it can damage human hearing. But the cicadas that we have here in the Okanagan, their sound is harmless to us. And worldwide there are about 3,000 different species of cicadas, And in British Columbia, depending on what resources you look at, there are 9 to 12 different species of cicada in British Columbia. And I'm not sure what species this is. Yeah, but we know he's an annual cicada, meaning that they come up every summer. A batch of them will come up every summer. Should we try to catch some cicadas? Yeah, I think we should. So a common name for cicada in some areas is heat bug, because they love to come out on a hot summer day. And that buzz, that clicking you hear in the park is such a Okanagan sound because they love the warm weather. And today is a hot day. I can hear the cicadas. We caught that guy. I wonder if we can catch another one. They love to hang out on evergreen trees. I can hear them clicking. They don't want to be eaten by some bird. So this is arrowleaf balsam root, and in some of the parks you'll see the cicada exoskeleton clutched onto those leaves. They really like them for some reason. We've got something else here, not a cicada, but it's another noise maker that we find in the park. It's a click beetle. He's quite docile, so I don't have to worry about putting him in my net. Yeah, so he's got those 2 false eyes on the top to scare away any sort of bird or predator that might try to eat him for lunch, but that's a click beetle. So another noise maker in the park. When you're out there and you hear all these bugs clicking and buzzing and humming, we got all sorts of insects watching us. So we can hear cicadas. They're a common insect in the Okanagan, a common bug, as we now know that bug is a very specific term for some types of insects, but we don't usually see them. So next time you're out in the park, you're out on the trail on a hot day like today, look for the cicada exoskeletons. Listen for their clicking and their humming. That's the sound of a male trying to attract a mate so that they can continue the life cycle of this true bug. And check us out on our website. We are offering more in-person programs in parks. In June we have a number of guided hikes. We have a birding 101 program. We have a butterfly bio blitz later in June. You can find all of those details at rdco.com/parks events. Thank you.